In a small, quiet town where life moved at a slow pace, there stood an old, slightly run-down school. The paint on the walls was peeling, and the classrooms often smelled of chalk dust and damp wood. This was St. Mary's High School, a place where dreams were rare and opportunities even rarer. Most students came from families struggling to make ends meet, and their lives revolved around part-time jobs, chores, and the hope of simply graduating. Principal Markham had been at the helm of the school for over 2 decades. He was a tall man with sharp features and a booming voice that echoed through the hallways. While some respected him for his strictness, others found him intimidating. What most people didn't know was that Principal Markham had a peculiar habit. He enjoyed making jokes at the expense of students he thought wouldn't amount to much. It wasn't malicious in his eyes. It was just his way of keeping things light. But to those on the receiving end, it often felt humiliating. One crisp autumn morning, the entire school gathered in the auditorium for a special announcement. A wealthy donor had agreed to sponsor new extracurricular activities, including a music program. As Principal Markham stood on stage adjusting the microphone, he explained how this would give students a chance to explore talents they didn't even know they had. The crowd clapped politely, but no one seemed particularly excited, except for Ethan, who sat quietly in the back row. Ethan was a boy of 14, with messy hair and clothes that were always a size too big. His family couldn't afford much, so he wore hand-me-downs from his older cousins. Despite his circumstances, Ethan was kind-hearted and hardworking. He kept to himself, avoiding trouble and doing his best to stay invisible. But invisibility wasn't something Principal Markham appreciated. Scanning the room, his eyes landed on Ethan almost immediately. "Well, well," Principal Markham said into the microphone, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Look who we have here. Ethan Carter. I hear you're quite the musician already." The audience chuckled nervously, unsure why Ethan was being singled out. Ethan shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his cheeks turning red. "Principal Markham," continued, "since we now have a fancy new cello thanks to our generous donor, let's put it to good use. Ethan, my boy, you'll be our first volunteer." Laughter erupted throughout the auditorium. Some students snickered openly, while others exchanged amused glances. Ethan felt his stomach churn. He had never touched a musical instrument in his life, let alone something as complicated as a cello. Mrs. Langley, the music teacher, watched from the side of the stage. She frowned at Principal Markham's words, sensing the cruelty behind them. She knew Ethan wasn't the type to cause trouble or seek attention. Why humiliate him like this? Still, she remained silent, hoping the situation wouldn't spiral further. As the assembly ended, Ethan trudged out of the auditorium, his head bowed low. He could still hear faint giggles from passing classmates. Deep down, he wanted to disappear, to escape the embarrassment. But little did anyone know, this moment would mark the beginning of something extraordinary. The days following the assembly were some of the hardest Ethan had ever faced. Whispers followed him in the hallways, and he could feel eyes on him during lunch breaks. Some students mimicked playing a cello with exaggerated movements, laughing as they passed by. Ethan tried to ignore them, but it was impossible not to let their words sting. He hated feeling like a joke, especially when he hadn't even done anything wrong. Despite his discomfort, Ethan knew he couldn't back out of the assignment. Principal Markham had made a big deal about it in front of the entire school, and refusing would only give him more ammunition to tease him with. So, reluctantly, Ethan showed up at the music room after school for his first lesson. The room smelled faintly of polished wood and old sheet music, and sunlight streamed through the dusty windows. In the corner stood the cello, a sleek, glossy instrument that looked far too elegant for someone like him. Mrs. Langley greeted him warmly, her voice soft and encouraging. "Don't worry, Ethan," she said with a smile. "Everyone starts somewhere. Even the greatest musicians once held their instruments awkwardly." Her kindness helped ease some of his nerves, though he still felt out of place. She handed him the cello and showed him how to hold it properly. At first, Ethan struggled just to balance the large instrument between his legs. His arms felt stiff and the bow kept slipping out of his fingers. Every note he attempted sounded scratchy and off-key, making him cringe, but Mrs. Langley didn't give up on him. Instead, she patiently guided him step by step, teaching him how to position his hands and draw the bow across the strings smoothly. By the end of the lesson, Ethan managed to produce a single clear note. It wasn't much, but it gave him a tiny spark of hope. For the first time since being assigned the cello, he thought maybe, just maybe, he could do this. Over the next few weeks, Ethan practiced diligently. He spent hours in the music room after school, often staying long after everyone else had gone home. Sometimes Mrs. Langley stayed late too, offering tips and encouragement. Other times, he practiced alone, replaying the same notes over and over until his fingers ached. Though he didn't admit it to anyone, Ethan found himself looking forward to these quiet moments. There was something calming about the rhythm of the music, even if it wasn't perfect yet. At home, things weren't easy. Ethan lived in a tiny apartment with his mom and younger sister. Money was tight, and there was no space or money for a cello of his own. Instead, he borrowed one from the school, carrying it carefully in its case every day. His family didn't understand why he was putting so much effort into something that seemed so trivial. "Why waste your time on that thing?" his mom asked one evening, watching him struggle with the heavy case. Ethan shrugged, unsure how to explain that it wasn't just about the cello anymore. It was about proving to himself that he could rise above the ridicule. As the weeks went by, Ethan began to notice small improvements. Notes became clearer, rhythm steadier, and melodies started taking shape. He still stumbled often, and frustration sometimes brought tears to his eyes, but he refused to quit. Each practice session was like solving a puzzle, and every breakthrough filled him with pride. Slowly but surely, the cello stopped feeling like an alien object and started becoming an extension of himself. Meanwhile, the teasing at school began to fade, at least a little. Some students lost interest once they realized Ethan wasn't going to react or fight back. Others noticed how seriously he was taking the lessons and grudgingly admitted that he might actually be trying. While Ethan still felt isolated at times, he found comfort in knowing that he was working towards something bigger than himself. Little did anyone know, including Ethan, that this journey was setting the stage for something truly remarkable. As the weeks turned into months, Ethan's progress became impossible to ignore. What had started as hesitant scratches on the strings gradually transformed into smooth, melodic notes that filled the music room with warmth. Mrs. Langley watched, in awe as Ethan practiced, his once awkward movements now fluid and confident. She noticed something special in him, a natural ability to hear and feel the music almost as if it came from deep within him. One afternoon, after Ethan finished playing a simple piece, Mrs. Langley smiled warmly. "You're doing much better than I expected," she said, her voice tinged with pride. "Most beginners take longer to get this far." Ethan looked up, surprised by the compliment. He wasn't used to praise, especially not for something he had once dreaded. Encouraged by her words, he asked, "Do you think I'll ever be good enough to play real songs like the ones professionals play?" Mrs. Langley chuckled softly. "Of course," she replied. "But remember, even professionals started where you are now. Let's keep building your skills." With that, she pulled out a stack of sheet music from her desk. "Here's something new for you to try," she said, handing him a piece marked with complex notes and symbols. It was a beginner arrangement of Bach's Cello Suite No. 1, one of the most iconic pieces written for the instrument. Ethan stared at the page, his heart racing. The notes looked intimidating, but there was a spark of excitement in his chest. He wanted to prove, to himself more than anyone, that he could do it. Ethan threw himself into learning the piece, determined to master its challenges. At first, the intricate patterns felt overwhelming. His fingers stumbled over the strings and his bow skipped unevenly across them. Frustration bubbled inside him, threatening to take over. But instead of giving up, Ethan reminded himself why he was doing this. Every note he played was a step away from the ridicule he'd faced, a step closer to proving that he wasn't just some poor boy who could be laughed at. Slowly but surely, the piece began to come together. Ethan spent hours, practicing late into the evenings, often staying in the music room until the janitor knocked on the door to remind him it was time to leave. He listened to recordings of professional cellists online, trying to mimic their techniques and understand the emotion behind each phrase. Mrs. Langley noticed how deeply he connected with the music, how every note seemed to carry a piece of his soul. "You have a gift," she told him one day. "Not everyone can make the cello sing like you do." Word of Ethan's improvement eventually reached other students. One day, while heading to the music room, he overheard two classmates talking. "Did you hear Ethan playing the other day?" one of them whispered. It actually sounded good. The comment caught Ethan off guard. For so long he had been used to being mocked, but now people were noticing his hard work. And they weren't laughing anymore. It wasn't widespread admiration, but it was enough to give him a sense of belonging he hadn't felt before. Principal Markham, however, remained oblivious to Ethan's transformation. Occasionally he would pass by the music room and hear faint strains of music drifting through the door. But he dismissed it as unimportant, still convinced that forcing Ethan to play the cello had been nothing more than a harmless prank. Little did he know, the boy he had ridiculed was blossoming in ways no one, not even Ethan himself, could have predicted. Ethan's growing confidence spilled over into other areas of his life. He began sitting a little taller in class, speaking up when he knew an answer, and standing up for himself when someone teased him. The cello had given him more than just a skill. It had given him courage. And though he didn't realize it yet, his journey was far from over. The seeds of talent and determination he had planted were about to bloom into something extraordinary. Ethan's growing reputation as a talented cellist began to spread throughout the school, though not without its challenges. As more students heard him play during practice sessions or casual performances in the music room, opinions started to shift. Some of his classmates who had once laughed at him now watched in awe, whispering about how much he had improved. "Did you hear that? It's like, he's actually good," one student muttered to another after catching Ethan rehearsing a hauntingly beautiful melody. Others, however, weren't so quick to change their minds. A group of older students, particularly those who played sports or were part of the popular crowd, grew resentful of Ethan's newfound attention. They didn't understand why someone like him, a quiet, unassuming boy from a poor family, was suddenly getting noticed. One afternoon, as Ethan walked down the hallway carrying his cello case, he overheard a snide comment. "What's the big deal? It's just some fancy bowing on strings," one of them sneered. Another chimed in. "Yeah, it's not like he's saving lives or anything." The words stung, but Ethan kept walking, pretending not to hear. He had learned by now that proving people wrong wasn't always about arguing. It was about showing them through actions. Still, moments like these weighed heavily on him. There were days when self-doubt crept in, making him question whether all his hard work was worth it. Was he really cut out for this? Could he ever be more than the kid everyone underestimated? On those tough days, Ethan found solace in the music room. It became his sanctuary, a place where he could shut out the noise and focus on what truly mattered: the music. Each time he picked up the cello, he reminded himself of how far he'd come, from awkward beginner to someone whose playing could silence a room. Mrs. Langley noticed the toll the negativity was taking on him. One day after a particularly grueling practice session, she sat beside him and said gently, "Ethan, remember why you started this. You didn't pick up the cello to please anyone else. You did it because it makes you happy. Don't let anyone take that away from you." Her words struck a chord deep within him. For the first time, Ethan realized that his journey wasn't about proving himself to others. It was about finding joy and purpose in something he loved. Determined to rise. Above the mockery, Ethan threw himself into his music with renewed passion. He practiced harder than ever, tackling increasingly difficult pieces and pushing past his limits. His dedication didn't go unnoticed. Even some of his former bullies began to soften their attitudes. During lunch breaks, a few students would linger near the open door of the music room, listening quietly as Ethan played. Occasionally, they'd clap softly when he finished, offering hesitant smiles. These small gestures meant the world to Ethan, showing him that his perseverance was breaking down walls he hadn't even known existed. One evening, as Ethan packed up his cello after practice, Mrs. Langley handed him a flyer. "There's a local community concert next month," she explained. "It's informal, just a chance for musicians to share their work. I think you should perform." Ethan froze, his heart pounding. Performing in front of an audience? The idea terrified him. But then he thought about all the hours he'd spent practicing, all the sacrifices he'd made to get here. Maybe it was time to take the next step, to show the world that he wasn't afraid to shine. That night, as Ethan lay in bed staring at the ceiling, he felt a mix of fear and excitement. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he also knew he couldn't turn back now. The cello had given him strength, confidence, and a voice when he had none. And no matter what happened next, he vowed to keep playing, not for anyone else, but for himself. The day of the community concert arrived, and Ethan's nerves were in overdrive. He had spent weeks preparing for this moment, rehearsing tirelessly to perfect every note of the piece he planned to perform, Tchaikovsky's Rococo Variations. It was a challenging choice, even for experienced musicians, but Ethan wanted to push himself, to show that he wasn't just capable, he was determined to excel. Yet as he stood backstage, clutching his cello case tightly, doubts swirled in, his mind like a storm. What if he messed up? What if people laughed at him again? Mrs. Langley appeared beside him, her calm presence offering some comfort. "You've got this, Ethan," she said softly, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Remember why you're here. This isn't about impressing anyone. It's about sharing your love for music." Her words helped steady his breathing, if only slightly. Taking a deep breath, Ethan nodded and opened his cello case. He carefully positioned the instrument between his legs, adjusting the bow one last time before stepping onto the stage. The small auditorium buzzed with chatter as Ethan walked into the spotlight. Rows of faces turned toward him, their expressions curious but unreadable. For a split second he felt frozen, his hands trembling as he gripped the neck of the cello. Then, closing his eyes, he took another slow, steadying breath. The room fell, silent. With a gentle sweep of the bow across the strings, Ethan began to play. From the very first note, something extraordinary happened. The music flowed out of him effortlessly, each phrase filled with emotion and precision. The audience seemed to vanish. All that mattered was the connection between him and the cello. Every ounce of frustration, determination, and resilience he'd felt over the past months poured into the performance. The rich, resonant tones of the cello filled the room, weaving a story that no words could ever express. As Ethan moved through the variations, the complexity of the piece became almost hypnotic. His fingers danced across the strings with a confidence that surprised even himself. The fast-paced sections were thrilling, while the slower ones carried a depth of feeling that left listeners holding their breath. By the time he reached the final variation, the entire room was spellbound. When the last note faded into silence, there was a moment of stillness, a collective pause, as if no one wanted to break the magic. Then applause erupted. It started softly, hesitant at first, but quickly grew into a thunderous wave of clapping and cheering. People rose to their feet, their faces glowing with admiration. Ethan blinked, stunned. He hadn't expected this kind of reaction. Slowly, a shy smile spread across his face as he bowed awkwardly, unsure of how to handle the overwhelming response. Mrs. Langley beamed from the wings, tears glistening in her eyes. After the concert, strangers approached Ethan to congratulate him. Parents praised his talent, young children asked questions about the cello, and even a few teachers from St. Mary's High School stopped by to shake his hand. For the first time, Ethan felt truly seen, not as the poor boy who had been mocked, but as someone worthy of respect and admiration. It was a feeling he would never forget, but perhaps the most surprising moment came when Principal Markham showed up. Clad in his usual formal suit, he looked unusually uncomfortable as he made his way through the crowd. Finally reaching Ethan, he cleared his throat and said gruffly, "Well, I didn't expect that. You were Good. Though his tone lacked warmth, Ethan could tell the principal was genuinely taken aback. For once there was no sarcasm or mockery in his voice, just an awkward acknowledgement of what everyone else already knew. Ethan had proven himself in ways no one anticipated. That night, as Ethan lay in bed replaying the events in his mind, he realized something important. This wasn't the end of his journey. It was only the beginning. The cello had given him more than skill. It had given him a purpose. And now, with newfound confidence and a growing belief in himself, Ethan was ready to take on whatever came next. Word of Ethan's incredible performance at the community concert spread like wildfire. By Monday morning, the entire school was buzzing with excitement and disbelief. Students who had once laughed at him now whispered in awe, recounting how his music had left the audience speechless. Even teachers couldn't stop talking about it. "Did you hear? That boy who was forced to play the cello turned out to be a prodigy," one teacher exclaimed during lunch in the staff room. Principal Markham sat quietly at the end of the table, his face unreadable, but his thoughts swirling. Ethan walked through the hallways feeling both proud and uneasy. For the first time, people weren't mocking him. They were congratulating him. Some students even asked if he'd teach them how to play the cello. It was strange, yet exhilarating to be treated with respect after so many months of ridicule. But despite the newfound admiration, Ethan stayed grounded. He reminded himself that this wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about doing what made him happy. Mrs. Langley wasted no time capitalizing on Ethan's success. The very next day, she approached him with an idea that would change everything. "Ethan," she began, her eyes sparkling with excitement, "there's a regional youth orchestra competition coming up. I think you should audition." Ethan froze, his heart skipping a beat. A competition? Against other talented musicians from across the state? It sounded impossible. "I don't know, Mrs. Langley," he said hesitantly. "What if I'm not good enough?" She placed a hand on his shoulder, her voice firm but kind. "You're better than you realize, Ethan. You've worked harder than anyone I've ever taught. Don't let fear hold you back." Her confidence in him was contagious, and after much deliberation, Ethan agreed to give it a try. Preparing for the audition became Ethan's sole focus. Every spare moment was spent practicing, refining every detail of his technique. He chose Tchaikovsky's Rococo variations again, knowing it showcased his strengths while challenging him to grow further. Mrs. Langley helped him polish each section, offering advice on dynamics, phrasing, and expression. Late into the nights, Ethan played until his fingers ached, determined to deliver a flawless performance. Finally, the day of the audition arrived. Ethan stood outside the audition hall, clutching his cello case tightly as he waited for his turn. Inside, judges listened intently to young musicians pouring their hearts into their instruments. When Ethan's name was called, he stepped inside, his legs trembling beneath him. The panel of judges barely glanced up as he adjusted his chair and positioned his cello. Taking a deep breath, he began to play. From the opening notes, something remarkable happened. The room fell silent, all attention focused entirely on Ethan. His playing was flawless, each note ringing with clarity and emotion. The variations danced effortlessly under his bow, capturing the joy, sorrow, and triumph embedded in the music. By the final variation, the judges exchanged glances, their expressions revealing astonishment. When Ethan finished, there was a brief pause before applause erupted. Not just polite clapping, but genuine appreciation. Later that evening, Ethan received the results. He had won second place in the competition. Though he hadn't taken first, the achievement was monumental. News of his success traveled quickly, reaching not only St. Mary's High School but also local newspapers and radio stations. People marveled at how far Ethan had come, from being ridiculed as a joke to earning recognition as a gifted musician. Principal Markham, however, couldn't escape the weight of his earlier actions. As he read the glowing headlines about Ethan, guilt gnawed at him. He had intended to humiliate the boy, yet Ethan had risen above it all, turning humiliation into triumph. Sitting alone in his office, The principal stared at the newspaper article, featuring Ethan's photo, and realized the depth of his mistake. What he had thought was harmless teasing had nearly crushed a young boy's spirit, and ironically, it was that same boy who now embodied resilience and grace. Ethan's second-place win at the regional competition became the talk of the town. Local newspapers ran stories about the underdog cellist who had risen above adversity, and even the school buzzed with pride. For once, St. Mary's High School wasn't known for its crumbling walls or lack of resources. It was celebrated for nurturing a talent like Ethan's. Students who had once teased him now approached him with admiration, asking questions about his journey and congratulating him on his success. Teachers beamed whenever they mentioned his name, holding him up as an example of perseverance and determination. But amid all the celebration, Principal Markham found himself increasingly uneasy. He couldn't shake the image of Ethan standing on that stage, bowing to thunderous applause. The boy's triumph felt bittersweet to the principal, not because he begrudged Ethan his success, but because it forced him to confront his own actions. What had started as a cruel joke had spiraled into something far greater than he'd ever imagined. And now, instead of being remembered as the man who led the school, he feared he'd be remembered as the man who tried to tear Ethan down. One morning, Principal Markham made a decision. He called an emergency assembly, gathering the entire student body in the auditorium where it had all begun months ago. As he stepped onto the stage, the room fell silent. His tall frame and stern expression commanded attention, but there was something different about him today, a vulnerability that no one had seen before. "Students," he began, his voice uncharacteristically soft. "I want to take a moment to talk about someone special in our school." He paused, glancing toward the back of the room where Ethan sat quietly, unsure what to expect. Many of you know Ethan Carter. You've heard about his incredible achievements in music, the regional competition, the concerts, the praise from judges and teachers alike. But what you may not realize is how much courage it took for him to get here. The principal's tone shifted, becoming heavier with emotion. "When I first assigned Ethan to play the cello, I did so without thinking. I thought it would be funny, a way to lighten things up. But looking back, I see now how wrong I was. My words hurt him, and for that, I am deeply sorry." The room was completely silent, every student hanging on his words. Principal Markham turned directly toward Ethan, meeting his gaze. "Ethan, I owe you an apology. You didn't deserve the way I treated you. Instead of seeing your potential, I dismissed you. And yet, despite everything, you proved me and everyone else wrong. You showed us what hard work, resilience, and passion can achieve." Ethan sat frozen, his heart pounding. He hadn't expected this kind of acknowledgement, especially not in front of the entire school. Slowly, he stood up, his cheeks flushed with embarrassment but also gratitude. "Thank you," he said softly, his voice barely audible over the murmurs of the crowd. The students erupted into applause, cheering for both Ethan and the principal's unexpected display of humility. In the days that followed, Principal Markham seemed like a changed man. He spent more time visiting classrooms, listening to students' concerns, and encouraging their dreams. Though some were skeptical of his sudden change of heart, others appreciated his efforts to make amends. For Ethan, the public apology meant more than just vindication. It was proof that people could grow and learn from their mistakes. As for Ethan, he continued to shine. Inspired by his journey, he decided to pursue music seriously, applying for scholarships and auditioning for advanced programs. With Mrs. Langley's guidance, he prepared tirelessly, determined to keep pushing boundaries. Meanwhile, his story served as a powerful reminder to everyone at St. Mary's. Kindness and belief in others could transform lives, while cruelty only held people back. Years passed, and Ethan's life took a path no one could have predicted when he first picked up the cello. His dedication and talent earned him scholarships to prestigious music conservatories, where he honed his skills under the guidance of world-renowned instructors. What started as a reluctant assignment in a small-town school transformed into a lifelong passion. Ethan performed on stages across the globe, captivating audiences with his emotive playing. Critics praised his ability to weave raw emotion into every note, often remarking that it felt as though his cello was speaking directly to their hearts. But Ethan never forgot where he came from. During breaks between performances, he returned to St. Mary's High School to visit Mrs. Langley, who had become more than just a teacher. She was like family. Together, they launched a program to provide free music lessons to underprivileged students, ensuring that other kids wouldn't miss out on opportunities simply because of their circumstances. "Music saved me," Ethan often said during interviews. "It gave me hope when I needed it most. I want to give that same chance to others." Principal Markham, meanwhile, retired early from his position at the school. The weight of his past actions and the lessons he'd learned through Ethan's journey stayed with him long after he left. Instead of disappearing quietly, he dedicated his retirement to mentoring disadvantaged youth in the community. He volunteered at local shelters, organized workshops, and even helped fundraise for arts programs in schools. Though he rarely spoke about Ethan publicly, those close to him knew how much the boy's resilience had impacted him. "Sometimes we underestimate people," he once admitted during a quiet moment. "But if you're lucky, they remind you of your own humanity." Back at St. Mary's, Ethan's story became legend. Teachers told new students about the shy boy who turned humiliation into triumph, inspiring generations to believe in themselves. A plaque commemorating his achievements hung proudly in the music room, alongside photos of him performing with famous orchestras. Students passing by would stop to read the inscription, "Talent is born in silence, but greatness is forged through perseverance." As Ethan's career soared, he remained humble, always attributing his success to the people who supported him along the way. "I didn't do this alone," he said during a speech at a gala honoring young musicians. "Mrs. Langley believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. My mom worked tirelessly to keep our family afloat while I chased my dreams. And yes, even Principal Markham played a role. He taught me that failure isn't falling down, it's staying down." The audience erupted into applause, moved by his words. Ethan's journey came full circle one evening when he performed at Carnegie Hall, fulfilling a dream he'd once thought impossible. As he stood on the stage, bathed in golden light, he looked out at the sea of faces and smiled. Among them sat Mrs. Langley, wiping away tears, and Principal Markham, clapping louder than anyone else. In that moment, Ethan realized something profound. His story wasn't just about personal triumph. It was about connection, about how kindness, forgiveness, and belief in others could create ripples that touched countless lives. Today, Ethan travels the world not only as a performer, but also as an advocate for arts education. He speaks at conferences, writes articles, and partners with organizations to bring music to underserved communities. His message is simple yet powerful. Everyone has potential waiting to be unlocked. All they need is someone to believe in them, even if at first that someone is themselves. And so what began as a cruel joke became a tale of redemption, resilience, and transformation. Ethan proved that talent could bloom in the unlikeliest of places, and that even the hardest challenges could lead to beautiful outcomes. His cello, once a symbol of ridicule, now echoed with the sound of hope, a melody that would resonate for years to come.